A story is a sequence of events that unfold through time. That is Pixar's definition of a story, and it was the first one that I was introduced, and it is the most elegant and simple definition that I have been able to find. It's by far my favorite. We're going to talk more about different story structures today. I've tried to organize all of the different story models by complexity. We'll start with the simplest and move on to the most complex. Storytelling is something that humans naturally do. I think I've always been so fascinated by storytelling, and I've worked for literally decades to try to be a good storyteller, and I think I put storytelling on a bit of a pedestal. I made it a little bit more holy than it needed to be. It's something that everybody does, that everybody can do. It's part of being human. We tell stories. Anything which includes multiple events that happen in a series is a story. And so, of course, those events can be told in a book, or in a conversation, or in a presentation, or in a play, or in a film. There are lots of ways to share a story. So beyond Pixar's definition, I think the most universally understood concept of what a story is that it has a beginning and a middle and an ending. We start somewhere, something happens, and we finish somewhere. I heard a big noise. I went to check it out. It was Santa Claus on my roof. He gave me presents. That's a story. I was sitting at my desk. My mom brought me a cookie, and I ate it. And that's a story. That's a story. That's a super boring story, but it's a story. So here's the first one that gets a little bit more complicated. This is called Freytag's Pyramid. I was sitting at the lake, and a duck came up to me, and I fed him bread. That's a story. It's a super simple story. It's a fairly boring story, but it is a story. So we're going to go through some models of storytelling to help us make our stories more interesting. The first is Freytag's Pyramid. We start with the status quo. This is the reality for the character at the current time. Then there's some rising action. There is something that happens that changes the status quo. Then there's a climax. There's something intense or dangerous or important that happens, something significant. And then there's a falling action. Things calm down. Things are changed because of this important thing. And then there's a resolve. Things are different. I was sitting at the lake, minding my own business. And suddenly I noticed a duck come up to me with glasses on. And he walked up to me and he poked me right in the nose. So I gave him some bread. He seemed happy about that. And he waddled off eating his bread. And I found that he had left me his sunglasses. So now we get to the infamous hero's journey. If you have ever studied film in any capacity for very long, you will have heard of this. This is like the gold standard for all cinema for the past 30 years, mostly because of George Lucas. The hero's journey, or the monomyth, was a storytelling model or structure or analysis that was popularized by Joseph Campbell in his book. Now, Joseph Campbell kind of came up with this structure based on his analysis of ancient mythologies and oral storytelling traditions from many different cultures. He analyzed all of them and tried to find what they had in common and wrote down those themes, and this is what resulted. Now, I say it's the gold standard for cinema because George Lucas read that book and wrote Star Wars and essentially tried to perfectly replicate the hero's journey pattern within his Star Wars story. So we're going to do the almost cringy, because it's so stereotypical at this point, film school thing, and run through the hero's journey and compare it to Star Wars. It's the quintessential thing to do, but if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? It's true, and it works, and it's cool to see it in action and realize, oh, that's why I liked Star Wars. So the hero starts in the known world, the ordinary world. He has a call to adventure. Something calls out for him to move forward. He gains some sort of supernatural aid, someone to help him and guide him on his quest. And then he crosses the threshold. This is the beginning of his transformation, and he goes from his known ordinary world into an unknown extraordinary world. There he meets both a helper and a mentor who will aid him in his quest. He goes through challenges and temptations, and things become more and more difficult. Often he finds one more helper right before the abyss. Things are dark. This is a huge turning point for the hero. He has a revelation, and he dies and is reborn. This causes a transformation and an atonement, and he is able to cross back from the unknown back into the known. He's given a gift from the goddess, something that changes things for him forever, and he returns home. This is the structure for most fantastical literature. This is Harry Potter. This is most of your fantasy and sci-fi. It's beautiful. It works. But I used to read too far into it. I used to think that that was the story and that all stories were that way. And while there will be elements of the hero's journey in most films that have a single protagonist, it's just one way to understand the story. The next thing that we're going to talk about is Dan Harmon's story circle, sometimes called the story embryo. Dan Harmon is the creator of Rick and Morty and Community. From what I understand, his story circle is essentially his kind of informal adaptation of the hero's journey. So the way that he does it is slightly different, but you'll see significant similarities. I'm pulling this straight from Dan Harmon's own article about it. A character is in a zone of comfort, but they want something. They enter an unfamiliar situation, adapt to it, get what they wanted, pay a heavy price for it, then return to their familiar situation, having changed. Now, the 3-act structure is one of the more traditional Hollywood cinema things. It's one of the big ones that you learn early in film school. The 3-act film structure sort of takes Freytag's pyramid, elongates it on one side to increase tension and raise the stakes, extends it over a longer period of time, and tries to essentially inject a lot more emotion. Act 1 is the setup. Act 2 is the confrontation. Act 3 is the resolution. Act 1 and Act 3 are much shorter. Act 2 is much longer. This is where we're getting into specific film rules. A lot of film professors and even film professionals will talk about how you're trying to hit certain acts and certain plot points at roughly certain screenplay page numbers. There's a good formula to this. So in Act 1, we start off with 0 stakes. We have a bit of a setup. We're introduced to the characters. We understand their status quo. And then the plot point that drives us into Act 2 is some sort of inciting incident. There's something that happens that forces the character out of their comfort zone in order to start making a change. Then we ride that wave and we continue forward and we start having some trials or tribulations. We call this rising action. The stakes are getting higher. The character's getting more into what they're doing. We're feeling failure more and more. And then we have another plot point, a big twist propels us forward. And gets us to the beginning of Act 3, where near the beginning of the act, there is a huge crisis or climax. Everything comes to a head. Everything becomes absolute chaos. All of the subplots run into each other, and things are finally resolved. Most 3-act structure analysis include a bit of a dark night of the soul, where things are really, really terrible and really, really angry and really, really sad for a few minutes right before the final climax, where the character has to basically pull themselves up by their bootstraps and decide to charge in one more time. And then there's a falling action. Things calm down, things return to normal or a new status quo is established, and things are resolved. Things get even more specific and even more prescriptive, even more Hollywood when we look at Blake Snyder and his method that he lays out in Save the Cat. It's called Blake Snyder's Beat Sheet. Now, again, we're going to see some similarities to Dan Harmon's story circle and to the hero's journey because that's just storytelling that works. But Blake Snyder is going to tell us exactly how it should line up in our screenplay. Act 1 is in the ordinary world. This is our thesis. Beat 1 is the opening image. Beat 2 is the stated theme. Beat 3 is the setup. He says that this should be 1 to 10% of the story. At 10%, beat 4 is the catalyst, the life-changing moment that happens to the hero. So now, beat 5 is the debate. It's 10 to 20%. We're going to talk about, do I really have to do this? And then we're going to get into Act 2, the upside-down world, the antithesis. So at 20% into the story, we're going to hit beat 6, which is break into 2. The hero decides to take action and locks on to accomplishing the goal. Beat 7, B story, 22%. A thematic secondary story is kicked off, often about love or friendship or mentorship. Beat 8, fun and games, 20% to 50%. The hero is in the new world. We see how they're exploring it. We see what they're doing with it. This beat delivers on the promise of the premise. So these are a lot of the reasons you came to see the movie. This is very like superhero movie, very like Fast and the Furious movie. Beat 9, the midpoint, so 50%. The middle of the story is the culmination of the fun and games. This is a false victory or a false defeat. The midpoint raises the stakes. Beat 10, the bad guys close in. This is 50% to 75%. Stakes are being raised. Tension is getting higher. This is our rising action again. So beat 11, all is lost at 75%. This is the moment that the hero feared would actually happen. And now we spend in beat 12 from 75% to 80% on the dark night of the soul, feeling that sorrow and mourning and lamenting and trying to understand. Now this is where Blake Snyder's beat sheet differs from both Dan Harmon and the hero's journey. Because with those other two, at this point, we would be coming back into the ordinary world. But for Blake Snyder, it's a different world now. For him, it's a merged world. It is the synthesis of both the thesis and the antithesis. So at beat 13, we break into 3 at 80%. New information is discovered and the hero knows what they must do to solve the problems. Beat 14 is the finale, 80% to 99% of the story. This is the big showdown where the hero finally wins. Beat 15, the final image, 99 to 100%. This is the after photo of the hero in the world. This is a mirror of the opening image. All right, let's talk about the 7-point plot structure real quick. In some ways, it's like the 3-act structure, but more. We have our hook. This is the starting point. This should feel like the opposite of the ending. Plot turn 1. This is the call to adventure or the inciting incident. Pinch 1. A moment of conflict. The protagonist has to solve a problem. Midpoint. A switch from reaction to action. We're proactive now. A switch from ignorance to enlightenment. Pinch 2. Something bigger goes wrong, and we have to solve the issue again. Plot turn 2. Right when all might be lost, the character learns something crucial, and then there's a resolution. Again, feels very, very familiar. It's basically the 3-act structure. It's basically Freytag's pyramid, but it's got its own little nuance to it. Something that I want to point out concerning all of these different story structures. I think that I read too much into these story structure templates early on in my career, and I thought that they were prescriptive and essentially the law. And the reality is that they are not. They are very interesting, very helpful tools. Stories that fit in with these patterns tend to do really good and tend to work well with people, and it's important to master. I plan on using these as I learn to write screenplays over the next few years before I try to break away from them.